It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on everything. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one kettle. It's the same sunshine, it's the same rain, the same struggle just to maintain. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one kettle.
Greetings and welcome to Discussions with Indigenous Education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian. We have been going over the 10 stages of genocide in relationship to the genocide of the brown and darker-skinned indigenous population, particularly from the East Coast and the southeastern portions of the United States. And we have a very, very interesting show for them today, I think. Yeah, I'm your host, Tavis Sanders, also known as RedTail Hawk. I'd like to welcome our co-host, SliverFox, also known as Renee Sanders.
Greetings, everyone.
And if you're just tuning in to the show, we've been going over the 10 stages of genocide, and today we are going to be concentrating on stage 5. However, let's review the previous stages so that you can have a direction. You know, we're going in that direction with respects to the telling of this story, right? And so let's go over the shows that we've been doing, that we've done so far.
Okay, well, we've gone over classification. We've gone over symbolization. We've gone over dehumanization. And we've gone over discrimination.
Okay. And you know what? I know we're supposed to move forward, but I already have something to say. And that's that with respects to dehumanization, right? And symbolization. And today's climate, right? You know, we're filming this during the presidential election period, and one of the candidates just used a very old tactic of, you know, calling darker skinned peoples, particularly darker skinned indigenous peoples. I want to make sure that we're clear, cannibals.
Or,
right?
Well, just basically dehumanize
Just dehumanize them in general. However, I just wanted to make sure that I pointed out that, you know, as we discussed in some of the previous shows, cannibalism was used to symbolize, right, put a negative inference and symbolize the group, to dehumanize them in order for them to be seen as worthy of slavery, right?
Yeah, less than human, almost.
Exactly. And this has happened to the indigenous population in the 1500s. You know, again.
In the late 1400s.
In the late, as soon as they got here, right? And so I just wanted to, it's the same thing over and over again. And once we learn that, once we as a collective people learn that, you know, we'll be able to move past that, and it won't have such a effect on the population, right? I just wanted to, which is why this is so important, because it's still relative to what we are dealing with as a population today.
Yeah, we're still dealing with the same tactics.
Still the same tactics.
You know, and we need to be able to recognize the tactics. You know, and these tactics have been happening for so long that they've just become commonplace, where we have accepted them so much that
yeah, it's the culture that the colonizing agency bought into to help them keep that control, right? To separation and the dehumanization of communities. With that said, interesting, because this is important, the organization, right? And this stage is something that we looked at and we just was like, wow, okay, like,
where do we start?
And we definitely want to make sure that we're comfortable with taking our time with this one here, right? And so we always like to start from the beginning. And the beginning is actually knowing what they mean by organization. And so let's look at the definition. Just take let's read the definition of organization with respects to the stages of genocide.
Right, yes, and not that this is not a legal definition or any other definition. This is the definition that came from the people that that made this these stages of genocide. And so,
Which we're going to get into in a second. We got into it, some of the previous shows if you're interested, but it's something else. Go ahead, let's read it.
okay, but anyway, genocide is always organized, usually by the state, though sometimes informally or by terrorist groups. Special army units or militias are often trained and armed. Plans are made for genocidal killings. Now, that is the definition
Okay, yeah.
that they have.
And it's kind of loose, right? We look for it for a few times, like, wait a second, that can't be the definition. But it is,
Yes.
it is, right? And so I asked Mom, right, let's start from the beginning, because genocide in law began in 1950s, right? That's when the term was coined, and it became illegal to do. So anything prior to that time doesn't count, so-called, right?
Right.
And one of the reasons why the United States supposedly have been able to throw it off any claims of genocide in law, because they said, wait a second, these things happened prior to 1950, and so they can't, legally get held against us. However, we're going to change that today. We're going to start changing that today with this show, right? And
We're not. We will be starting before 1950.
No. What we're going to do is we're going to change the perspective of the United States and its effect on genocide against multiple populations, but specifically the dark-skinned Indian, right? And I would like to start from the organizing of the United States, right? Because the United States is the body politic that would eventually start to perpetuate and commit these crimes against our population. And so I want to start from the founding of the United States and see how organization was used to depress, and commit genocide against indigenous populations in general, but specifically the darker skinned Indian.
I was going to say, now, even though when the United States was formed, they basically just picked up on laws that were already existing.
Right.
So this is not the beginning of it, but it's a more formal, and a more formal organization of it on a wider perspective.
And you know what? More than anything else, is an organizational name that we can point to from 1776 forward that is conducting this. You can't just say colonial America anymore, right? You can't blame it on any particular colonial adelantado or anything like that.
A colony particular, like maybe just Virginia or just South Carolina.
Right.
Now it's
Now it's the
United
collective
States.
group. Now it's the United States. So let's start from the forming of the United States, and let's see what they did with respect to their organizing method.
Okay, well, remember, now 1776, when the United States finally became an independent nation in their minds, right?
Okay, that's important, right? This is when they declared it, right? The self-declaration.
Yes, however, it wasn't until 1788 when the Continental Congress, that was the Treaty of Paris.
Yes, it was.
Okay, the Treaty of Paris that agreed. They finally agreed that the United States is a country.
Right, and in law, in order to be a state, in order to achieve statehood, an previously acknowledged state has to acknowledge you. And so while in 1776 they may have so-called won their freedom against the British, until an already established governing body acknowledged them as a state, they were still, not considered full statesmanship yet.
And they were still doing a lot of fighting. We know even here in Philadelphia that there were still battles that were going on all over the city.
The Scalp Act against the Lenape was still in effect during that time. And so, they're fighting for their freedom against one nation while they are committing genocidal tactics to another. And what America has always been, right? A contradiction, right?
And see, and this is and this again now is the beginning of when things were being formulated with the United States government. We know that one of the first things that they created, so in 1788, they created the War Department.
Right. Okay.
And the War Department was to monitor the military and then all the naval activities. However, the Indians, and again we're going to be using that terminology Indian today, because a lot of these laws that were created with the formation of the United States was using the terminology Indian.
Right.
And so, because we're going to be reading laws and things, so we're going to be using that terminology today.
Although I like indigenous better, but we
usually use indigenous. Because the native people were considered independent nations, each individual tribe was considered an independent nation. And so when the United States is dealing with this, it's like, okay, you know what? We need to put them in, let's include them into the War Department.
Because, again, they're still at war with a lot of these tribes, right?
Right, yes.
And so, again, I just want to point out one thing before we move forward. And like you said, because the native Indian nations, the tribes were considered autonomous in function, right? They were sovereign. They had function, right? And this points out here that until the United States, and even after the United States was formed, they saw the tribes as its own state. I'm gonna start using state because it's different between tribe and state. That they're not, educating us on, and we'll get to that at another time. But, I know we want to move forward from here, but I think this is a good space for us to take a break, because when we get back, we'll start to talk about why it was important for the United States military to take control over, the Indian affairs specifically. So we'll be right back with more discussions with Indigenous Education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education.
An American Deceptions Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 1, is a trailblazing depiction of the lesser-known history of America's dark-skinned indigenous peoples, now referred to as African American and Afro-Latinos. Red SliverFox Thunderbird mends together indigenous oral history, primary sources, archaeology, and extensive research to paint a vivid picture of the original groups that resided in the Americas in the shadows of the continent's past, which include both Mongoloid and Negroid groups. Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past exposes the true history of indigenous Americans in contrast to what we have been told in school and what has been presented in entertainment. This miseducation and reclassification of the original peoples span over hundreds of years, but Thunderbird impressively lays out how identity transformation occurred. This book reveals hidden knowledge that shatters the accepted concept of the transatlantic slave trade and makes one question the African identity given to Black Americans and Afro-Latinos. Revealing America's Dark-Skinned Past, Volume 1, is a noteworthy book that confronts an element of American Indian and Black history that many have not grasped.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education.
Welcome back to Discussions with Indigenous Education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian. Right before the break, we were talking about, what the United States did in 1788, right after the, Paris Agreement, where they established the War Department, right? Military, Navy, and Indian problem, right? Because they were at war with the Indian population. And so I just wanted to, before we move forward, wanted to, backtrack, make sure that y'all knew that, but then talk about the realities that, again, the Indian tribes were considered their own military power, right? And so if the United States wouldn't, didn't take control, then the natives may take control back, right? So they were at war at this time.
Yes, and it's numerous. The tribes were numerous, and so even if they became friendly with one tribe,
another issue with another tribe springs up.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, and it was also one more thing that was really important to the United States at this time, and why the Indians were moved into the War Department, and that was because of trade. A lot of the commerce, economics were coming from the indigenous communities for the United States to ship out.
Yes, the fur trade, of course, was very big, and then around that time, the beaver trade became very big. Also, they started making those black hats and everything.
Yeah.
So, yes,
they are nice. I ain't gonna lie. Them things is clean, smooth. When you see a real one, but shiny. Nonetheless, go ahead. So the fur trade was very important.
Just trade period.
Just trade period. And I wanted to point out something that a lot of people miss when we're talking about this period of time, and that's of course agriculture, tobacco, right? Without tobacco, Virginia wouldn't have existed in the first place. But there's one thing that we miss, and that's shipbuilding. And I know we talked about it in a few years ago in the episodes that we did on the slave ships. However, at this time, the United States was the number one export of ships.
Of wood.
Of wood, right. And so the wood, the lumber, the knowledge of the streams or rivers that they would use, the clear cutting of a lot of the forestry, which is what eventually turned into our metropolitan big cities here on the East Coast, this was happening at the same time, right? Indigenous peoples were benefiting from some of this economics, and a lot of us were being placed into servitude or minimum wage jobs because of this, right? This is the United States doing United States stuff. I just wanted to acknowledge that this was happening at that time also. But let's move into
the trade,
right? And what was going on with the Intercourse Act. I know I mentioned this, so maybe you can share a little bit of what that is and why that's important.
Okay, well, the Non-Intercourse Act of 1793. Now, again, this act was, what it was giving this now War Department power to do things. Okay, so let me read what the act is. The act authorized the president to appoint temporary agents to reside among the Indians, guiding them into acculturation of American society by changing their agricultural practices and domestic activities. So again, this act...
I'm sorry, I just was like, what? Go ahead. Oh, my goodness. So the act created space for individuals to act as agents on behalf of the United States within the various tribes.
Yes. Now, let me read a particular section of that act, which will explain all of that. Okay.
I need more explanation, definitely.
Okay, and be it further enacted. Okay, that in order to promote civilization among the friendly Indian tribes, and to secure the continuance of their friendship, it shall and may be lawful for the President of the United States to cause them to be furnished with useful domestic animals and implements of husbandry, and also to furnish them with goods or money in such proportions as he shall judge proper.
Oh, really? Okay.
And to appoint such persons from time to time as temporary agents to reside among the Indians.
Oh, wow. All right. That's a lot. And I would like to just read over a few of these things and just, maybe ask you a question, or maybe you might have some statement.
I don't have an answer, but
No, okay. So first things first, right? In order to promote civilization among the friendly Indians, right? And so there's a particular group of Indians that you don't consider friendly.
oh,
Right?
yes.
Also, I like to just acknowledge that,
Who the friendly ones were?
well, not just that, but, what civilization, the definition of civilization can change depending on the culture that you come from, right? And that this term civilization, we should be careful with that term, right?
Well, again, and again, because the 5 civilized tribes is what we will be leading to eventually with this organization.
And could the 5 civilized tribe, could maybe a better and more fitting terminology they could have used was the 5 friendly tribes, because that's all it was. But I know we're going to be getting to that in a little bit. And I just wanted to say, that this act just said that the United States can just basically bribe the Indians, right? Give them domestic animals, give them this, give them that, in exchange for them, to try to stay friendly.
Well, that is what happened.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, so the last thing, which is something that I know that y'all like, hold on, wait a second. I know they're not going to just glance over that, and that's the Indian agent.
Oh, boy.
The Indian agent, right? And now, that term, what was they just described to us what an Indian agent was, but let's talk about maybe some of the things that may have happened, some of the things that may have done, some of this history that might show how the effect of an Indian agent on a native or Indian tribe.
It was interesting when we started doing the research for this and started reading up these things, is that we had a statement from an Indian agent that we had found many years ago, a very interesting statement that we found many years ago. And so we're going to be, I'm going to be reading the statement.
Okay.
Okay, but again, this was a statement of a gentleman who was appointed to live amongst the Creek Indians.
Okay.
Okay. And he was writing a report about a speech that he heard an Indian chief give to his people.
Okay.
Now, this chief, a little bit of background.
Yes. Yes, please.
This chief had just been up to New York, either to New York or to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He had gone up north and had been meeting with some of the tribes up north, probably the Lenape and some of the other northern tribes, some of the
Iroquois tribes?
Yes, yes.
Seneca, he definitely met with the Seneca.
Oh, yes, because they speak about the Seneca.
Oh, okay.
In this one, yes. So he was up there and he was listening to the things that the United States government was telling the Seneca that they were about to do to them. And so he comes back and he's giving a speech to his people, and this is what the report is about the speech.
Okay.
Okay? Okay, and the gentleman's name was Abner Hammond. Okay, he was the Indian agent. Okay, and he said McGillivray, who was the chief at that time.
Of the Creek?
Of the Creek that had gone to
New York?
Yes, okay. He had received a letter from the American commissioners of the treaty at, it says unclear, but it looks like it's Seneca, which informed him that they, the Americans, had 15,000 men ready to come to the Creek land, and they were not coming to hurt them, but to make them tame, and that the Americans, desired him to have a good many of the tame women ready for them that they might incorporate with them and beget a tame breed of people.
Wow. Well, you know what? We actually really want to get into this. I want to get into this a little bit. And so let us take a break here. And when we get back, we'll review what we just read and we'll start to get into it a little bit. And so I hope that you've been enjoying the show so far. You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian, and we'll be right back.
You're watching Discussions with Indigenous Education.
Greetings. I'm SliverFox, co-founder of Indeed Indigenous Education, and I would like to invite you to visit indedushop.com. That's indedushop.com, and help support our mission to educate the public of the omitted history of the brown and dark-skinned indigenous population of the Americas. And, as always, we would like to thank you for your support.
Welcome back to Discussions with Indigenous Education, the genocide of the dark-skinned Indian. We are talking about organization with respects to the stages of genocide. And right now we are reviewing what the United States did with respects to Indian agents. And if you don't mind, I'd just like for you to read the statement one more time before we start to get into some of the particulars.
Okay. That he, the said McGillivray, had received a letter from the American commissioners of the treaty at, and we believe it is Seneca, which informed him that the Americans had 15,000 men ready to come to the Creek land, and that they were not coming to hurt them, but to make them tame, and that they Americans desired him to have a good many of the tame women ready for them, that they might incorporate with them and beget a tame breed of people.
All right, and this is a quote from an individual named Abner Hammond, correct?
Hammond.
All right. And so, I want to get into this just a little bit because...
Now again, the statement is this is Abner Hammond writing
what he heard.
What he heard McGillivray say.
All right, and McGillivray, right? But before I even ask, before we talk about McGillivray, matter of fact, let's talk about McGillivray first, because they talking about tamed women. They talking about 15. Let me just ask one question before we talk about McGillivray, right? They have 15,000 men that's ready, that's looking for tamed women, right? Is that not a declaration of war? Like if I hear that it's 15,000 soldiers about to come from New York to Georgia and they looking for women, and for me to have the group of women that they would find tamed is the term that I'm going to use, right?
This is the term that they use.
Ready so that we might, beget a tame breed.
So they want a tamer breed.
They want a tamer breed than the tame one that they already have. Again, we're talking about, so now, again, what happens when you mixed?
And who were these initial
tamed women, right? And the reality of it, as far as indigenous populations is concerned, is that the women that were biracial were placed to the side and held to be for the European men, right, more often than not.
Because they were a little more civilized.
Oh, really? Is that what that was? Is it civilized? Is it lighter skinned? Is it more
that they are blending into the American society, American ways?
And so, and were they ever successful at creating this tame breed of people? We're going to continue to talk about that, right? And so, let's talk about McGillivray, right? Because this is too much. This is very racist, very patriarchal, very misogynistic. And as an indigenous individual, you come and tell me that I'm thinking we at war. But let's talk about McGillivray, because McGillivray is the person that's actually supposed to be giving this, and first thing I like to acknowledge that I just consider is, wait a minute, the chief of the creek is in New York. Right? That's a long way for so-called, indigenous peoples and Indians to travel. They never talk about Indians traveling that far with respects to conducting business.
Oh well, after the establishment of the United States, Philadelphia became a hub of activity because all these Indian tribes now are realizing what is going on, and they want a little piece of this pie.
And so it's actually time for us to wrap this show up, right? We get into the end. There's so much to talk about. I don't want to stop in the middle, and have them. And so we're going to stop here. And when we get back, we're going to start getting into the United States Indian agents and land, right? Because now it's a few years later, and we need to start talking about how the United States organized itself in order to achieve the end goal of getting the land. And so I think that we've starting to really get into this now. It's a lot, right? I think we went over 3 to 5 years in this episode, from 1776 to about 1788 to 1790. And so we're going to be picking up from there in the next show. Red SliverFox, also known as Renee Sanders. I'm your co-host, Tavis Sanders, also known as RedTail Hawk. And we hope to see you next time on Discussions with Indigenous Education, the Genocide of the Dark-Skinned Indian.
It's the same hustle, it's the same thing, the same tears on that we pay. Maybe one day we'll see we're one big family, like it's one.